In December 1952, fog in London got so thick that movie theatres had to close. Not because people couldn't get to them, because once you were inside, sitting in your seat, you couldn't see the screen. The smog had seeped indoors. You're listening to The Unlit Room. Every story in here actually happened. That's the part that should scare you. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. Today, the 5 days London couldn't breathe. This episode's narration is AI-generated. The research, writing, and editorial decisions behind every story are made with care for accuracy and respect for those involved. December 5th, 1952. Central London, late afternoon. A fog had been present during the day, dry, smoky, but not unusual for London. The temperature was unusually cold. Britain had been hit with heavy snowfall for weeks. An anticyclone, a high-pressure system, had settled over the city, trapping air beneath a layer of warm air above. As darkness fell, the fog thickened. Londoners were used to pea soupers, thick fogs that rolled in from the Thames, turned the air yellow-green, made you taste coal on your tongue. Annoying, yes. Dangerous, sometimes, but normal. The city had lived with coal smoke for centuries. Every winter brought fog. Every winter you learned to navigate by memory, feeling for curbs with your feet, counting steps between familiar corners. This fog looked familiar at first. Same greenish-yellow color, same smell of coal tar, same tarry particles of soot that stuck to your coat, left dark smudges on your collar when you touched it. But as night came on December 5th, the visibility dropped. Not just to a few meters, to centimeters. In the Isle of Dogs district, people couldn't see their own feet when they looked down. Not an exaggeration, not a figure of speech. You would stand on a pavement you'd walked 1,000 times, look down at where your shoes should be, and see nothing but yellow-green murk. Street lamps with incandescent bulbs gave no penetrating light. The glow diffused into the fog and disappeared. Pedestrians shuffled forward through neighborhoods they'd lived in for decades, utterly lost. Some wore smog masks purchased from chemists, fabric masks soaked in water held over nose and mouth. They didn't help much. The particles were too fine, the chemicals too pervasive. Drivers abandoned their cars in the middle of streets. You couldn't drive when you couldn't see the bonnet of your own vehicle. You couldn't even walk safely. People collided with lampposts, stumbled off curbs into the road, wandered in circles. The fog was thick, but London had seen thick fog before. This would pass. It always did. London in 1952 heated its homes with coal. Low-grade coal called nutty slack. Cheap, smoky, the kind that left a greasy residue on your windows. Every chimney in the city was burning it. Every factory, every power station. On a normal day, the wind carried the smoke away. On December 5th, there was no wind. Just cold, still air pressing down, and a city of 8 million people, all burning coal to stay warm. Micro cliffhanger 1. Londoners had seen fog before, but this fog did something fog wasn't supposed to do. By December 6th, the smog had seeped indoors. Not just a faint haze, thick enough to coat exposed surfaces with a greasy grime. Run your finger along a table that had been cleaned that morning, and it came away black. The windowsills were slick with it. The smell was inescapable. In movie theatres across London, audiences sitting in their seats couldn't see the screen. Even with all the lights on, the projection beam cut through the yellow haze for a few meters, then dissolved. People who'd paid for tickets sat in the dark, staring at nothing. Film screenings were cancelled, concerts abandoned mid-performance. Stages disappeared into the murk even when performers were standing under spotlights. The smog wasn't staying outside, it was seeping through cracks around windows, under doors, through ventilation systems designed to bring fresh air into buildings. If you opened your door to let someone in, the smog rolled in with them like water, pooling in the hallway. There was no escape from it. Not in your home, not in public buildings, not anywhere. Public transport, everything except the underground, stopped running. Buses couldn't navigate, trams were invisible until you were standing directly in front of them. Outdoor sports were cancelled. In large enclosed spaces, visibility decreased to the point where you couldn't see across the room. A concert hall could seat 500 people, but the audience in the back rows couldn't see the stage. The fog that Londoners had learned to tolerate outside was now inside their homes, their theatres, their shops, inside their lungs. This wasn't normal fog anymore, this was something chemically different. Every day during those 5 days, London released 1,000 tons of smoke particles into the air. 370 tons of sulfur dioxide, which converted in the moist air into 800 tons of sulfuric acid, 140 tons of hydrochloric acid, 14 tons of fluorine compounds. The ANT cyclone held it all in place, pressing it down, trapping it at ground level. Each night, the fog thickened further. The sun was too low in the December sky to burn it off. Micro cliffhanger 2. Inside URLZ Court, breeders at the Smithfield show were fashioning gas masks out of whiskey-soaked grain sacks. It was already too late for 11 of their animals. The Smithfield show was one of Britain's most prestigious livestock competitions. Prize cattle from across the country brought to URLZ Court for judging. Animals worth thousands of pounds, bred for years. Brought to London to compete. During the smog, 11 prize heifers choked to death inside the exhibition hall, not outside in the streets. Inside, in a building designed to protect them. Breeders arrived in the morning to find their animals dead. Tongues swollen, eyes bulging. The smog had done what disease, what transport, what every other hazard of livestock showing had failed to do. Breeders fashioned improvised gas masks for the surviving cattle. Grain sacks soaked in whiskey draped over the animals' muzzles like surgical masks. Desperate, makeshift, absurd. If the smog could kill cattle indoors, animals with larger lungs, stronger respiratory systems than humans, what was it doing to people? The answer came slowly. Then all at once, hospitals filled with patients struggling to breathe, the very young, the very old. Heavy smokers, and in 1952, Britain, that meant most men. Lungs filled with catarrh and pus. Airways mechanically obstructed by the body's own fluids, trying desperately to expel the particles, the acids, the toxic cocktail they'd been breathing for days. Hypoxia, the body starving for oxygen even as you gasped for air, even as your chest heaved, even as you fought for every breath. Deaths from bronchitis and pneumonia increased more than 7-fold across London. In the East End, where housing was denser, where coal smoke from thousands of chimneys had nowhere to go, the death rate increased 9-fold. Undertakers began to run out of coffins. Not metaphorically, literally. The supply of coffins in London was calibrated for normal mortality. This was not normal mortality. Florists ran out of bouquets for funerals. There weren't enough flowers in the city to bury the dead. Micro cliffhanger 3. The fog lifted on December 9th. The dying didn't. A brisk westerly wind finally swept through London on the morning of December 9th, pushing the toxic cloud east, out over the North Sea. The smog cleared in hours. You could see across the street again. You could see the sky. The air was breathable again. People went back to work. The theatres reopened. Public transport resumed. London returned to normal, but the hospitals didn't empty. The morgues didn't empty. The funerals didn't stop. People who had breathed the smog for 5 days, whose lungs had been coated with sulfuric acid, hydrochloric acid, soot particles so fine they embedded in lung tissue like splinters, continued to die. Pneumonia, bronchitis, respiratory failure. Weeks after the fog had cleared, months after. In February 1953, Labour MP Marcus Liptoon stood in the House of Commons and put a number to it. 6,000 dead. 25,000 had claimed sickness benefits during the smog period. The government's official estimate was 4,000. But even that, 4,000 dead from 5 days of fog, made it the deadliest air pollution event in British history. 4,000 people killed by breathing the air in their own city. Except the real number wasn't 4,000, and one man knew it. The government estimated 4,000 people had died during the smog. That number alone made it the deadliest air pollution event in British history. In February 1953, Labour MP Marcus Liptoon stood in the House of Commons and said 6,000 had died. 25,000 had claimed sickness benefits during the smog period. But one man knew the truth: E.T. Wilkins, officer in charge of atmospheric pollution for the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research, the UK's top pollution expert. Wilkins plotted a chart of excess deaths, not just during the 5 days of the smog, but in the weeks and months after. People who had inhaled the toxic air, whose lungs had been damaged, who died of pneumonia and bronchitis in January. In February, in March, his chart showed 12,000 excess deaths between December 1952 and March 1953, 3 times the government's official estimate. Wilkins' findings were never finalized into an official report. The government blamed the lingering deaths on influenza. His chart stayed buried for 50 years. It wasn't until 2004, 52 years later, that independent research confirmed what Wilkins had known in 1953. 12,000 people had died, not from the flu, from breathing their own city's air for 5 days in December. Every breath you take without thinking about it, every time you walk into a building and the air inside is cleaner than the air outside, every smoke-free zone, every pollution regulation, every air quality standard, that exists because 12,000 people in London suffocated on coal smoke and fog, because one scientist refused to let the government pretend it was the flu, because in 1956, 4 years after the smog, 2 years after Wilkins' buried chart, Parliament passed the Clean Air Act. Smoke-free zones, restrictions on coal burning in urban areas. Another deadly fog killed 750 Londoners in 1962. But nothing ever approached the scale of December 1952. The reforms worked, eventually. The most lethal disasters aren't always the most visible. 12,000 dead from something as ordinary as fog and coal smoke, because no one thought to look at what happened when you trapped them together. And because when someone finally did look, when Wilkins plotted that chart, the truth was buried for half a century. If this one kept you up tonight, good. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. Subscribe so the next one finds you too. Follow the Unlit Room wherever you listen. Tell a friend who can't sleep. Full story on the main channel. Follow if you're wide awake. That was the Unlit Room. See you in the dark.